Okay, so what we're talking about today is changing quadratic equations from standard form into vertex form. We've worked with standard form, right? We've replaced the y with 0 to find the roots by quadratic formula or factoring or completing the square. And we've also worked a lot with vertex form when we've graphed, right? And we've tried to find the vertex. So now we're going to learn how to change from one form to the next. So I guess the first point would be like y equals x minus 2 squared minus 1. If we wanted to find the vertex, do you agree that the vertex would be 2, negative 1? Axis of symmetry is x equals 2. And then the direction of the opening is up. So we just mean that it's just like a regular U-shaped, right? Now, if we took this equation, y equals x squared minus 4x plus 3, and we put it in the calculator, and we said, well, where is the vertex? It's going to be at 2, negative 1, axis of symmetry is x equals 2, and the direction of opening is also up. And you might say, well, those two are different equations, but they're actually not, because if we were to multiply out x minus 2 squared minus 1, that would be x squared minus 4x plus 4. That's the x minus 2 quantity squared minus 1. And that changes into y equals x squared minus 4x plus 3. So what we find is that those two equations are exactly the same. This is in what we call standard form, and this is in what we call vertex form. So it's pretty easy to go from vertex form to standard form. All you have to do is multiply out the equation. And of course, if we were asked to find the vertex, the axis of symmetry, and the directions of opening, we would always prefer vertex form. It's just easier. It has all the information that we need. So now what we want to learn is how to go backwards, how to go from standard form back to vertex form. And we already know how to do this, we just haven't done it yet, I guess. So here would be the equation, y equals x squared minus 4x plus 3. What we're going to do is kind of group the first two terms together. So if I'm going to write that out as a step-by-step, I'm going to just write myself a little note. Group first two terms together. And notice that I left that little space there, okay? And the space is actually going to be on both sides, because what we're going to do is add half the middle term squared. You remember that. Add half the middle term, or I should say really the middle number. Add half the middle number. Sorry, that's not showing up. There we go. Add half the middle number squared to both sides. So for this problem, half the middle number squared, half of negative 4 is negative 2. If we square it, it's negative 4. It's to both sides. Now the problem here is that this y likes to be alone. It doesn't like stuff stuck on that side. So what we're going to do is we're going to then balance the equation or subtract that 4 from both sides. Or I'm just going to say get the y alone. So that 4 that we just added, we're going to move it over here. And now you can see that down there. And then we're almost done. We're just going to factor what we now made, what we call a perfect square trinomial. X squared minus 4x plus 4 is the same thing as x minus 2 squared. And of course, 3 minus 4 is negative 1. So now, in a couple of steps, you've changed an equation from standard form to vertex form. And by the way, when I say graphing form, that's the same thing as vertex form. I use that kind of interchangeable. Graphing form, vertex form. So let's look at this one. Y equals x squared minus 10x plus 21 if we follow our steps. So what we're going to do is group the first two terms together. 10x, kind of leave that blank, plus 21. The blank, of course, is on both sides. Half the middle term squared we know is 25. 25 gets added to both sides. But this y doesn't like the 25 on its side, so we balance the equation, get the y alone, by moving the 25 back over. So now it's y equals x minus 5 squared minus 4. And you're done. And now if I needed to graph that, you could say, well, it goes right 5, down 4. It's in vertex form. The next one here, we'll do the same thing. X squared plus 6x, leave the blank, plus 4, leave the blank. Half the middle term squared is 9, add to both sides, but then the y likes to be alone, so we move the 9 to the other side, and then we can factor, and then 4 minus 9, negative 5. So you might feel like that's not too bad, right? I can do that. Okay. The next one over here, one more. Now this one's going to be a little tougher. Why? Odd number in the middle. So we know that when we have an odd number, it's just a little harder for us to take half the middle term squared. So we've done this before, though. We know half of 3, you could even write it out, half of 3 is 3 halves. 3 halves squared is, of course, 9 fourths. 9 fourths gets added to both sides. You do not want to do this as a decimal. You want to do it as a fraction. So it's y equals x plus 3 halves squared. And then, of course, that's a little stressful. Negative 7 minus 9 fourths. You could do it on your calculator or think it's negative 28 fourths minus 9 fourths. So that's going to be what? Negative 37 fourths. Okay. So far, so good? It only gets a little bit tougher, and the way that it gets a little bit tougher is with a number in front. So in this last row, 4, 5, and 6, well, we've got what we call that leading coefficient. So this is a little tricky. What we're going to do when we have a leading coefficient is we're going to factor it out of just the first two terms. X squared plus 2x, leave the blank, minus 1. Even if this 1 had been a multiple of 2, I would not factor the 2 out of that constant term. It only gets factored out of the first two terms. So then again, we do half the middle term squared, so half of 2 is 1, 1 squared is 1. But you notice when we go to balance it on the other side, we have to remember that now this 1 is inside the parentheses with the 2. So even though we wrote down plus 1, we wrote a value of 2. So 2 is what gets added to the other side. And I'll go through that again on the next one if that was tricky for you. This 2 stays as part of the answer, and then you got minus 3. Okay. Try it again with this one. Negative 2. Now this one's a little trickier because it's a negative. So here you're going to factor out the negative 2. Now watch what happens when you factor out the negative 2. Notice that that sign there changes to a negative 4 because negative 2 times negative 4 is positive 8. Now we're caught up with half the middle term squared. Of course, we've done this a lot, is 4. But now we recognize because the 4 is in parentheses with the negative 2, it's really the value of negative 8 that gets added to that side. So when we scoot it back over, positive 8. So y is going to equal negative 2x minus 2 squared plus 3. Okay. Last one. The last one here has just a negative 1 in front. So what we're going to do is pull out that negative 1, x squared plus 2x. Notice that sign changes, plus 5. Sorry, running over there. Half the middle term squared is a 1, right? Half of 2 squared is 1. But it's really, to add to the other side, a negative 1. Just bounce that over there. So then we're going to add 1 to both sides to balance that out. So the final answer is negative x plus 1 squared plus 6. Okay. All right.